Jonathan Carlyle lived in a house that seemed to float above the city like a glass palace. Every morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows and danced on the marble floors. The furniture was sleek and modern, and every surface gleamed with polished perfection. Yet amid all this beauty, there was a quiet emptiness. Jonathan spent most of his days in a private study filled with screens and blinking lights. From there, he oversaw his vast tech empire, making decisions that shaped markets and moved billions. He was used to power and control, but he was not used to feelings that could not be managed by a ledger or a calculator at 8 years old. Lucas had rich brown eyes that flickered with curiosity whenever he noticed something new. He could spend hours lining up his small cars along the windowsill, arranging them by size or color, and then pushing them gently back and forth. His father often watched from behind a pane of glass, studying every little twitch and turn. But lately, Lucas had grown quieter and more distant. The bright laughter he once shared with his mother when she came home late at night had faded. Instead, he would retreat into a world of patterns and routine, clinging to the small comforts. He understood. When Lucas was first diagnosed with autism, Jonathan had met the news like a boardroom challenge. He read every report, watched medical videos, and hired tutors and specialists who could teach Lucas's basic skills. He spared no expense on the latest therapies or the most experienced professionals. He booked private sessions in the mansions, polished rooms where Lucas learned to recognize letters, count beads on an abacus, and say simple words aloud. Yet despite all the money and talent, something was missing. Lucas still seemed lost inside his own thoughts. Alina, Jonathan's wife, had once been the balance to his sharp focus. She was gentle and open-hearted, a landscape artist who traveled to exotic countries to paint sunlit valleys and misty mountains. Her laughter filled their home when she was there, echoing through the high ceilings like a warm promise. But her trips grew longer and more frequent. She would kiss Jonathan lightly on the cheek before boarding a plane, promising to be back soon, and Lucas would wave with a small smile. Then the door would close, and Lucas would stand at the threshold, clutching his blanket, watching until the car disappeared. Aisha Thompson stepped into their lives on a bright Monday morning. She was a black woman in her early 30s who carried herself with quiet strength. Her smile was warm, and her voice had a soothing rhythm. She arrived in simple clothes, a faded denim jacket, a soft scarf, and comfortable shoes. In her hand, she held a well-worn notebook filled with notes about childcare strategies and sketches of playful games. She had trained for years with children of all abilities, learning not just how to teach them, but how to listen to them. At first, Jonathan barely noticed her. He met her once in a brief introduction across the foyer. He shook her hand, told her his expectations, and then returned to his study. To him, she was simply one more staff member, another piece in the vast, well-oiled machine of his household. He focused on budgets and reports, on algorithms and forecasts. Aisha went about her day quietly, checking on Lucas's schedule, preparing his breakfast of oatmeal and apples, and guiding him through exercises that strengthened his tiny fingers for writing. Lucas, however, seemed to notice Aisha from the start. He watched her gentle movements as she arranged his toys with care. He paused his usual routine of lining up cars when she hummed softly while washing dishes. Sometimes, he would peek from behind the sofa and watch her smooth the wrinkles from his favorite blanket. He seemed to sense that her presence meant something different from all the others. He did not yet know why, but he felt a subtle calm when she was near. The mansion buzzed with activity each morning. Tutors arrived to work. On Lucas's speech, therapists guided him through exercises to help his balance. A pianist played soft music in the living room to stimulate his senses. But when the power went out one afternoon, everything changed. A sudden thunderstorm had rolled in, and the lights flickered once, twice, and then shut off completely. The steady hum of air conditioning died, replaced by silence and the distant rumble of thunder. Alarms beeped in the dark, and Lucas froze. He sank to the floor, hugging his blanket, his eyes squeezed shut, rocking back and forth. The storm's noise became a roaring monster in his mind. His breathing quickened, and he began to whimper softly. The tutors and therapists hesitated, uncertain how to help. They reached for their phones to turn on lights or play soothing music, but every beep from the devices made Lucas cover his ears tighter. From the hallway, Aisha stepped forward. She moved slowly, taking care not to startle him. She knelt beside Lucas, her voice low and steady. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." She reached out a hand, offering him his soft blanket. Her fingers brushed his cheek, not roughly, but gently, as if she understood exactly how much touch he could bear. She hummed his favorite nursery rhyme, her voice a soft lantern in the dark storm. Lucas's breaths began to slow. His hands loosened their grip around the blanket. A moment, he opened one eye and saw Aisha's face close to his. Her smile was calm, full of kindness. She continued humming until the alarms quieted. Then, when the lights flickered back on, Lucas nodded once and whispered, "Thank you." Jonathan had come downstairs to check on the alarm. He paused at the doorway and watched the scene unfold. His son, comforted by the black maid he had barely acknowledged before, was safe in her arms. In that instant, Jonathan saw his child in a way he never had. He saw Lucas's vulnerability and Aisha's compassion. His heart quivered, a sudden stirring of emotions he had long kept locked away. Guilt and gratitude mingled within him. Realized that no amount of money could teach true kindness. He backed away quietly, leaving Aisha and Lucas to their moment. Back in his study, Jonathan paced in front of his largest screen. He stared at graphs and lines that once excited him, but now seemed empty. He thought about his wife, off in some distant land, and his son, who needed more than lessons and tutors. He thought about Aisha, her gentle humming, the look of trust in Lucas's eyes. He wondered how long he had lived behind his walls of glass and power, without truly seeing the people closest to him. That evening, Jonathan stayed up late, scrolling through his old photos. He found one of Alina painting in their garden, Lucas chasing butterflies in blue overalls. He almost deleted it, frustrated by memories of a life he no longer felt part of. Then he paused, felt the weight of his solitude and the emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. He realized he had built a mansion of glass, not to show off, but to hide himself from the world. In the quiet hours before dawn, Jonathan made a decision. He would start paying attention to the heartbeats he had long ignored. He would learn too. See Lucas not as a project, but as his son. He would recognize Aisha not just as an employee, but as a compassionate guide who could teach him to connect. He did not know how to begin, but he knew he had to try. Lucas slept peacefully in his crib, room clutching his blanket. Aisha sat in the corner chair, reading softly by lamplight. Jonathan stood at the door, watching them. He took a deep breath, ready to tear down the walls he had built around himself. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he had never felt in boardrooms or negotiations, a gentle hope that human kindness could change everything. The sky darkened in a hurry that afternoon, as though someone had flipped a switch. Jonathan was in his study, eyes fixed on lines of code scrolling endlessly across the screen. He barely noticed the distant rumble of thunder. In the living room, Lucas sat on a plush rug, toys arranged in neat rows around him. A few tutors hovered nearby, clipboard in hand, watching him practice saying new words. A single flash of lightning lit up the tall windows, followed by a low roar that rattled the glass. Then the lights blinked and went out, plunging the mansion into sudden, humming silence. Everything changed in that instant. The gentle hum of the air conditioner vanished. The soft music playing in the background stopped mid-note. The alarms on the walls began to beep, sharp and frantic. Lucas's eyes widened. He pushed himself backward, clutching the edge of his blanket. The perfect order of his toy cars felt lost in the dark. He rocked back and forth, covering his ears, as if he could shut out the storm entirely. His breathing quickened, and a whimper escaped his lips. The tutors froze, unsure what to do. They whispered suggestions to one another, voices hushed and worried. One reached for her phone to turn on the flashlight. Another tried to coax Lucas with a soft, "It's okay, Lucas," but the words only seemed to alarm him further. Every beep of the alarm felt to him like a sudden blow. He squeezed his eyes shut and curled into a little ball on the rug. Jonathan heard the commotion. He pushed away from his desk and hurried toward the living room. The hallway was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. He felt a flutter of unease, a sensation he had not experienced in years. Power outages were rare in his part of the city, and the mansion's backup generator should have kicked in immediately. He rounded the corner and stopped in his tracks. There, in the middle of the room, Lucas sat, shaking. Tutors clustered around, hands outstretched but uncertain.
Ow.
The alarms beeped like a warning call. And then Aisha appeared, moving calmly toward Lucas. She had been in the kitchen when the power cut out. She set down the bowl of chopped fruit she was preparing and walked into the chaos as if she had a clear path through it. Her footsteps were soft but steady, and her face carried an expression of calm determination. Aisha knelt beside Lucas without saying a word. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and spoke in a low, soothing voice. "Lucas, my friend, I'm here." The tone was soft, like a lullaby. She reached for his favorite blanket, the one with tiny stars embroidered along the edge, wrapped it around him. She hummed a familiar tune, a melody Lucas loved, but rarely heard these days. At first, nothing changed. Lucas's body trembled, and his hands stayed clamped over his ears. The alarms kept beeping. Then, almost imperceptibly, his rocking slowed. His fingers unclenched, and he lowered his hands. He took a small, shivering breath and sniffled. Aisha continued to hum, her voice steady and warm. She placed her free hand gently on his back and began to pat in a slow, even rhythm. Jonathan watched, rooted to the spot. He saw the tension drains from Lucas's small frame. The boy's shoulders dropped and his breathing steadied. Aisha's humming rose above the alarms, soft but clear. The other tutors stood back, giving her space, their eyes wide with admiration. In that moment, no one else mattered except Aisha and Lucas. A flash of lightning lit the room, followed by a louder crack of thunder that rattled the windows. The alarms finally fell silent as the backup generator kicked in. Light returned, steady and bright. The pianist in the corner instinctively struck a chord on the grand piano, filling the room with soft music. Lucas blinked, looked up, and gave Aisha a small nod. He whispered, "Thank you." His voice was faint but clear. Aisha offered him a gentle smile. "You did great," she said. She helped him stand, guiding his hand to a chair near the window. "Let's sit here until you feel safe." Lucas climbed onto the chair, clutching his blanket to his chest, rocked once more, but this time gently, comforted by Aisha's presence. Jonathan cleared his throat and stepped forward. He realized his voice felt rough when he spoke. "Thank you," he said, addressing Aisha. "That was remarkable." Aisha looked up at him, nodding respectfully. "He trusts me," she replied. "I know how to help him when he feels scared. He needs someone who understands his world." Jonathan nodded, his mind racing. He thought of every tutor he had hired, every specialist he had paid thousands to bring in. None had managed to reach Lucas in a crisis like this. And here was Aisha, a maid he barely knew, showing an understanding that no amount of money could buy. The tutors gathered around, offering to resume lessons or play soothing music. Aisha gently suggested that Lucas might need a quiet break instead. "He likes the garden," she said quietly. Jonathan looked toward the window. The storm had passed, and the garden glistened under the soft glow of the backup lights. He felt a sudden desire to step outside, to breathe fresh air, and to see if Lucas could find some peace among the flowers. He turned to Lucas and asked, "Would you like to go outside just for a little while?" Lucas hesitated, then looked at Aisha. She gave him an encouraging nod. He climbed down from the chair, picking up the blanket, and followed her through the French doors, onto the stone terrace. Jonathan jogged to catch up. The air was cool and clean, with drops of rain still clinging to leaves. Lanterns lit the pathway that wound through beds of lavender and roses. Aisha guided Lucas slowly, matching his pace, pointing out a robin perched on a branch and a small frog near the fountain. She spoke softly, giving Lucas time to focus on each detail. Lucas's eyes brightened when he saw the frog, pointed and whispered, "Frog." Aisha smiled. "Yes, a little frog. It likes the rain." She paused, letting the silence wrap around them like a blanket. Lucas closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. He looked at Jonathan, then back at the frog, as if rediscovering simple joys he had forgotten. Jonathan watched them both, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He realized he had never really seen Lucas's world. He had seen the patterns and routines, the tasks to be completed, but not the child himself. And he had certainly never looked at Aisha as anything more than a hired help. He saw her gentle strength and her gift for touching hearts. The three of them stood quietly for a long moment. The storm had moved on, leaving a gentle hush. Over the garden, Lucas reached out and took Aisha's hand. She smiled and squeezed his fingers. Then Jonathan stepped closer and knelt to Lucas's level. "Would you like to walk a bit more?" he asked softly. Lucas looked at him, considered the question, and then nodded. Together, they walked along the path beneath arching branches. Aisha talked about the garden, how the roses changed color in different light, how the lavender smelled calmer after rain. Lucas repeated some of her words, testing the sounds. Jonathan listened, heart thumping, aware that every word mattered. He had spent so long building walls around himself, walls of glass and steel, of money and ambition. In the rain-scented air, he felt a crack in those walls, a path opening toward his son. After a while, they stopped by a small bench beside a koi pond. The water was calm, with orange and gold fish gliding beneath the surface. Aisha sat and patted the space beside her. Lucas climbed up, resting his blanket on his lap. Jonathan stood behind them, hands in his pockets, watching the fish. He thought about how fragile this moment was, how easily it could be lost once returned to the hush and glare of the mansion's halls. Aisha leaned forward. "Lucas likes watching fish," she said. "They move slowly. They remind him that it's okay to be still." Lucas nodded and tapped the water gently. Fish rose to the surface, its mouth opening in a small circle. Lucas laughed softly, his first laugh since the storm began. Aisha laughed too, a clear, warm sound. Jonathan smiled, a feeling he had nearly forgotten. In the fading light, Jonathan felt a shift inside him. He realized that no amount of success or wealth could match these simple moments of connection. He felt gratitude toward Aisha for guiding his son back to peace. I felt wonder at Lucas's courage in facing his fears. He felt hope that together they could find new ways to face the storms in both their lives. The three of them stayed by the pond until the backup lights dimmed and the mansion's regular glow returned. Then Aisha stood and held out her hand to Lucas. He took it, and she helped him to his feet. Jonathan followed them back inside, feeling different than when he had left. Quiet strength of Aisha's kindness had stirred something new in his heart. And as they walked back through the open French doors, he knew that life in the glass mansion would never be quite the same again. Jonathan found himself drawn to the living room more often than before. He would pause at the doorway, watching Aisha and Lucas interact. It started with small moments. Aisha helping Lucas stack wooden blocks, guiding his little fingers to fit. Each shape just so, Lucas would hum softly, the same tune she hummed during the blackout. A line of blocks would rise taller than Lucas himself, and his face would light up with pride. Jonathan felt a tug in his chest. He had not known before a mixture of surprise and warmth that made him lean closer, noticing the gentle care in Aisha's hands. Each morning, Jonathan left for work later than usual. He had arranged his schedule so that he could see Lucas's breakfast ritual. Aisha would set a bowl of oatmeal with sliced bananas and a sprinkle of cinnamon on a low table. Lucas would settle on a cushion at her feet and eat in small, careful bites. Aisha talked to him about colors, how the cinnamon looked like fine sand at the beach, how the banana was pale like soft moonlight. Lucas watched her, and sometimes he repeated her words in his clear, small voice. Jonathan stayed in the hallway, unheard, but he felt like a tourist sneaking a glimpse of a hidden world. One afternoon, after multiple successful therapy sessions, Jonathan made an unexpected suggestion. "Aisha," he said, standing in the doorway as she packed away therapy tools, Lucas seems happier when he's with you. Would you come with us this weekend? I'm taking him to my country home." Aisha looked up, her warm eyes meeting his. She blinked in surprise, then smiled. "I would be honored, sir," she replied softly. Jonathan felt his heart pound at her use of sir. He realized that until now he had kept too much distance, even in his own home. That Friday, the sky was a clear blue as they drove out of the city. The car's engine hummed smoothly, and the countryside unfolded like a painting of rolling hills and green fields. Aisha sat in the back seat beside Lucas, who had pressed his forehead to the window, marveling at the grazing sheep and fluttering butterflies. Aisha pointed out a red barn and a cluster of wildflowers by the roadside. Lucas reached out and tried to touch them through the glass. Aisha laughed quietly, and Lucas laughed too, the sound like tinkling bells. Jonathan watched them from the front seat in the rearview mirror. He felt something loosen inside him, as if a tight knot had begun to unwind. He remembered his earliest years with Alina, before the mansion, before the diagnosis, when life seemed simple. He realized that he had allowed his fear and ambition to build walls around himself. Now seeing Lucas safe and curious and laughing, he felt his walls crumble. The country home was an old stone house surrounded by ancient oaks. It smelled of wood fire and fresh earth. Inside, the floors creaked, and sunlight spilled through small windows into cozy rooms filled with books and family photos. Jonathan had kept this house as it was when his own father had loved it. Now, as he unlocked the door, he felt a sense of history, of roots deeper than any foundation of steel or glass. Aisha carried Lucas across the threshold, his blanket tucked under her arm. Lucas looked around in wonder, his eyes wide at the shelves of old leather-bound books and a wooden rocking chair by the fireplace. Aisha knelt beside him and pointed to a painting on the wall, a golden sunset over a field of wheat. "See the colors?" she asked. Lucas nodded slowly, then smiled and said, "Son?" Aisha smiled back, her pride shining in her eyes. After they settled inside, Jonathan asked Aisha to show Lucas the little pond behind the house. She agreed, and the three of them stepped into the garden. The pond was small and clear, with water lilies floating on the surface. Dragonflies skimmed the water, their wings catching the sunlight. Aisha pointed to a bright green frog perched on a lily pad. Lucas squealed with delight and tiptoed closer. Aisha gently guided his hand to a nearby stone so he could lean without falling in. Lucas whispered, "Frog," and watched it disappear under the lily pad. Jonathan watched their gentle teamwork and felt a pang of regret for all the moments he had missed. He thought about his life in the glass mansion, where everything was controlled and polished. Here, in the dusty country air, things felt real and alive. He realized that real strength lay not in power or money, but in the ability to care and connect. That evening, they ate dinner in the large kitchen. Aisha had helped prepare simple foods: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed carrots. Lucas ate with gusto, and Aisha praised him for every bite. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, watching their easy conversation. He felt calm in a way he had never known. The laughter and chatter felt like music smoothing out the rough edges of his heart. After dinner, Lucas grew tired. Aisha carried him upstairs to a small bedroom with a wooden bed and a soft quilt. She tucked him in, humming the same nursery rhyme that had soothed him during the blackout. Lucas yawned and closed his eyes, breath slowing as he drifted to sleep. Aisha sat beside the bed for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. She straightened the blanket and whispered, "Sleep tight, my friend." Jonathan watched from the doorway. He swallowed hard and stepped into the room. "Aisha," he said quietly. She turned to him, her face gentle in the lamplight. "Thank you," he added, "for everything." Aisha offered him a small nod. "He trusts me," she said simply, "and I trust him." Jonathan thought about the years of tutors, therapists, and tests, and he realized that no one had ever given Lucas this kind of trust. The next day, Jonathan decided to explore the woods behind the house. He invited Aisha to come along, saying, "Lucas loves this trail. Will you join us?" Aisha smiled and accepted. They set off down a leaf-covered path, the air smelling of pine and damp earth. Lucas ran ahead, stopping to kick a pile of leaves or watch a squirrel dart up a tree. Aisha followed him with careful attention, and Jonathan walked a few steps behind, feeling like an outsider at first. But as he watched Aisha gently guide Lucas around rocks and roots, he felt a deep respect for her patience and skill. At the heart of the woods, they came to a fallen log across the path. Lucas stopped abruptly, his small body rigid as he stared at the log. Aisha knelt and whispered, "We can go over or under. Which sounds easier?" Lucas thought for a moment, then pointed down. Aisha brushed the leaves away, creating a small tunnel under the log. She showed Lucas how to crawl through. He hesitated, then pulled himself forward, giggling when he emerged on the other side. Aisha clapped softly, and Jonathan joined in, clapping louder. Lucas puffed his chest and said, "Look, Daddy." Aisha stood and brushed twigs from her jacket. Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes. He realized that for the first time, he was not just watching his sons progress, he was part of it. He knelt beside Lucas and whispered, "Great job, buddy." Lucas beamed and hugged his father's leg. Aisha looked on, her eyes shining with quiet joy. On the walk back, Jonathan found himself talking to Aisha. He asked about her life, her family, and how she learned to help children. She spoke with warmth, telling him about her childhood in a small town, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and her decision to work with special needs children. She said she loved to see them grow and learn to witness their small victories. Jonathan listened, fascinated. He shared some of his own story, his upbringing in a family that prized achievement above all else, his fear when Lucas was diagnosed, and his loneliness in the mansion. Aisha listened without judgment. She nodded and said, "You love him, Jonathan. I can see that." He felt a rush of relief that someone had seen his love, even when he had hidden it behind walls of work and worry. He thanked her, and she smiled, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. That night, back in the country home, Jonathan lay awake, listening to the quiet creaks of the old house. He thought about Aisha's friendship, Lucas's laughter, and the warmth he felt in his chest. He realized he wanted more of these simple moments, moments of trust, of sharing, of connection. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He would have to face his own fears and change the ways he had lived for so long. But for the first time, he felt ready. The next morning, as the sun rose, Jonathan joined Aisha and Lucas on the front porch. Lucas sat on a bench with his blanket, watching the sky turn pink. Aisha poured hot chocolate into 3 mugs, careful not to spill. Handed one to Lucas, who sipped slowly, eyes widening at the sweet warmth. She handed one to Jonathan, who felt the steam tickle his nose. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping and watching the sunrise. Jonathan glanced at Aisha and said, "Thank you for coming with us." Aisha smiled and squeezed his hand. Lucas looked up from his mug and said, "Good morning." Jonathan realized that this simple greeting, spoken clearly by his son, was one of the greatest gifts he had ever received. He leaned back, taking in the scene, the country home, the rising sun, the small family he was building. His heart felt full and hopeful, ready to face whatever came next with kindness and courage. Over the following week, Jonathan found himself waking earlier than usual. He would pause in the hallway as soft daylight filtered through the tall windows and listen to the quiet sounds of the house stirring to life. He heard Aisha's gentle humming as she carried Lucas's breakfast tray into the living room, and he felt drawn to watch them together. Lucas sat cross-legged on his cushion, holding a spoon of oatmeal, and asked him about its rays. Lucas repeated the word "sun ray," his voice small but clear. Aisha smiled at him and praised his words, and Jonathan realized he had never seen his son so proud of something as simple as a word. One morning, he followed them into the kitchen. Aisha was laying plates of fruit on the table, sliced strawberries, melon cubes, and a handful of blueberries. She arranged them in neat little piles and handed Lucas a small fork. "These are like little jewels," she told him. "See how blue the blueberries are, like tiny sapphire stones." Lucas picked one up carefully, studied it, and then popped it into his mouth. He grinned at Aisha. She laughed softly and nodded. Jonathan cleared his throat. "May I join you?" he asked. Aisha looked up, surprised but pleased. Of course, sir, she said. Lucas nodded, and Jonathan sat down beside his son. He picked up a strawberry and tried to describe it the way Aisha had described the blueberries. His words felt clumsy, but Lucas listened, and Aisha watched kindly, as if she knew how important this moment was. After breakfast, instead of disappearing into his study, Jonathan stayed in the living room. He watched Aisha help Lucas with his speech exercises, guiding him as he practiced new sounds. She used toys and pictures: an apple for the A sound, a ball for B. She spoke in gentle rhythms, giving Lucas time to form each sound correctly. When he stumbled, she smiled and tried again, never showing impatience. Jonathan felt a warm glow in his chest. He had hired tutors who used fancy tools and expensive lessons, but none had shown such quiet patience. That afternoon, he made a decision. He went into his study, where maps and charts covered a large table. One of the sheets showed a plot of land near the edge of the city, a location he had set aside for a potential project. He had once thought it could become another high-end development, but now he stared at the map and thought of Lucas and all the children who struggled to find the right support. He opened his laptop and searched for architects and planners who specialized in community projects. He drafted an email in a soft voice, as if speaking to himself. I want to build a center for children with special needs. I want it to be a place of calm, full of light, with gardens and rooms where families can learn together. He paused, then added, please include Aisha Thompson as a consultant. He hit send before doubt could choke him. That evening, he found Aisha gathering her notebook, and leaving Lucas's room after bedtime, he approached her in the hallway. Aisha, he said, his voice a little unsteady. I have a request. He continued, I'm starting a project on that land we own. I want to build a center. For children like Lucas, I would like your help in planning it. Aisha's eyes widened. Jonathan nodded, relief and excitement mingling in his chest. Thank you, he said softly. Over the next several days, Jonathan arranged meetings in his study. He invited the architect, a kind-eyed woman named Maria, and an interior designer, a man who specialized in warm, bright spaces. He asked Aisha to join them. In the glass-walled room, they spread out maps and sketches on the polished table. Maria described classrooms with low shelves and soft rugs. The designer suggested large windows that could open to a courtyard. Jonathan listened, but he watched Aisha most of all. Whenever Maria asked for insight, Aisha spoke up about children's needs: quiet corners for when they felt overwhelmed, colorful artwork at a child's eye level, sensory gardens filled with soft grasses and scented flowers. Jonathan took notes, surprised at how perfectly Aisha understood the small details that would make a place feel safe. Maria turned to Jonathan. These ideas are wonderful, she said. We'll incorporate them. Jonathan glanced at Aisha and said, your experience matters more than mine. I want this center to be a place where every child feels seen. Aisha offered him a warm smile. That's why I'm here, she said. The designer nodded in agreement and added, we'll draft some detailed plans and bring them next week. After the meeting, Aisha and Jonathan walked down the marble hallway together. Lucas was with a tutor, drawing shapes on a whiteboard. Aisha paused to clean up a pencil that had rolled away. Jonathan stopped beside her and asked quietly, how did you learn these things? About children's needs. Aisha touched the notebook. At her side, years of work and listening, she replied. Every child is different. You have to listen to their silence as much as their words. Jonathan nodded. The plot was surrounded by tall trees and wildflowers. Gentle breeze stirred the grass. Aisha followed with Lucas, who scampered behind her. The architect and designer trailed, carrying rolled-up plans. Jonathan felt a thrill of possibility as he looked at the land, imagining buildings nestled among the trees. He turned to Aisha. What do you think? He asked. She bent down and let Lucas pick a dandelion. I think children will love to run here, she said. And when they need quiet, they can sit under those trees. Jonathan pointed to a stand of young oaks. Yes, he said quietly. That's where we'll put the reading room. Aisha smiled, and Lucas waved his dandelion like a flag. Back in the city, word of the project began to spread among the staff. He introduced her as his consultant and spoke of her knowledge with genuine admiration. Aisha carried herself with quiet dignity, offering ideas and listening to feedback. She never acted as if she were above anyone, but everyone saw how much she understood. At home, Jonathan found himself helping more around the house. He offered to wash dishes after dinner so Aisha could focus on Lucas's bedtime routine. He learned the steps. First a warm bath, then a story on his lap, followed by the soft lullaby. He tried to hum along but quickly stopped, chuckling at his own cracking voice. Aisha laughed softly, and Lucas giggled too. Jonathan felt at ease in their laughter, an ease he had not known in years. One evening, after Lucas was asleep, Aisha stayed in the dining room to organize her notes. Jonathan joined her, carrying 2 mugs of herbal tea. He set one in front of her and took a sip from his own. "I've saved your favorite," he said. Aisha looked up, surprised. "Remembered," she whispered. He nodded. "You talked?" "About it once," he said. "Lavender and chamomile." She smiled, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. He felt a quiet joy in giving her something so small yet meaningful. They talked about the center's progress. Aisha described the color palettes she liked, soft greens and warm yellows. Jonathan asked questions, eager to understand. He realized how far he had come from thinking that money alone could fix everything. Now, he saw the real work in designing a place that felt like home. As the weeks passed, the foundations for the community center began. Jonathan arranged a small visit for Lucas and Aisha to watch the first concrete pour. They arrived to the rumble of machinery and the smell of wet cement. Aisha held Lucas's hand as the cement truck tipped its load. He watched the gray mixture flow into the forms. Then Jonathan spoke to the foreman, and they collected a small sample of wet cement in a bucket. He offered it to Lucas. "Do you want to feel it?" he asked. Lucas reached out, touched it, and giggled at the cold, wet texture. Aisha squeezed his hand. "Good job," she said. Jonathan felt proud of them both. That night, as Jonathan tucked Lucas into bed, he paused at the door. Lucas looked up at him and said, "Daddy, tomorrow we go to center?" Jonathan knelt and smiled. "Yes, buddy. We will." He looked over at Aisha, who nodded encouragement. He felt gratitude for her friendship and her kindness toward his son. In the following days, the 3 of them grew closer. Jonathan's schedule changed. He spent more time at home, more time talking to Aisha, and watching Lucas learn. He asked for her advice on small things, like what book to read to Lucas or how to arrange his playroom. She always answered with warmth and patience. Then came the day Jonathan invited Aisha to join his family for Sunday brunch. He set a place for her at the table and told the chef to prepare her favorite dish. When she arrived, she saw her name on a handwritten place card and her dish waiting hot and fresh. She blinked back tears of gratitude. Jonathan simply said, "Thank you for everything you do." She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "It is an honor." Later that afternoon, Jonathan went to his study and sat at his desk. He looked out at the gardens, where Lucas played with a new friend he had made at the center's opening event, and where Aisha supervised happily. Jonathan woke early with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The sun was just rising, painting soft gold light across the glass walls of the mansion. He dressed quickly and stepped into the quiet hall, where he found Aisha already preparing breakfast for Lucas. The young boy sat at his small table, rubbing sleep from his eyes and clutching his blanket. Aisha greeted Jonathan with a warm nod as she placed a bowl of warm oatmeal before Lucas. He noticed the gentle way she arranged the strawberries on top, each slice placed just so. It struck him that every small detail mattered more than any grand gesture. Jonathan poured himself a cup of coffee and joined them. Lucas looked up and smiled at his father, the way he only did when he felt safe. Jonathan sat down, surprised by how natural it felt to share this simple meal. He turned to Aisha and asked, "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, her hair tucked behind one ear. "Yes, sir. I hope you did too." He hesitated, then said, "Did better than I have in a long time." She offered him a small smile, understanding that words between them had shifted. He realized that she was no longer just an employee. She was part of his family. After breakfast, Jonathan led Aisha and Lucas to his study. He opened the door wide, revealing the large table strewn with plans and sketches for the new center. "Today we have the builders coming," he said. "I want you both to see how far we have come." The builders arrived, carrying steel beams and boards of polished wood. They set up scaffolding around the site model in the center of the table. Lucas clapped his hands in delight, and Aisha crouched beside him, explaining what each beam would become: the roof for a quiet room, the frame for a large classroom, the support for a covered play area. Lucas listened, eyes bright. Jonathan watched their faces. He saw Lucas's excitement and Aisha's pride. It reminded him how much had changed since that first blackout when Aisha comforted his son. He remembered the fear in Lucas's eyes and the gentle hum that had calmed him. Without thinking, he reached out and squeezed Aisha's shoulder, offering silent thanks for her courage and compassion. She looked up at him, surprise flickering in her eyes, and nodded. It was the first time he had touched her in a way that spoke of connection rather than formality. Later that afternoon, they all walked to the piece of land where the center would stand. The plot was now marked by stakes and ribbons, and large machines rumbled as they cleared ground for the foundation. Lucas ran ahead, his blanket trailing behind him, and Aisha followed at a steady pace. Jonathan trailed behind, taking in the sight of bulldozers shaping the earth. He thought about the lives that this building would touch, families who needed a place to learn, children who needed a space to grow. He felt proud, not of his wealth or his empire, but of this gift of community he was creating. Aisha took Lucas's hand and guided him to a mound of dirt. "This will be your garden," she said, pointing to a section near a row of young birch trees. "Here you can plant flowers and watch them grow." Lucas crouched down and scooped a handful of warm soil, letting it flow through his fingers. He smiled at Aisha, then turned and waved at Jonathan. "Garden," he said, his small voice firm. Aisha nodded. "Yes, your garden." Jonathan knelt beside them, careful not to get his suit dirty, and felt the cool earth beneath his fingernails. It was the first time he had touched soil in years. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air and the sense of new beginnings. As they walked back toward the mansion, clouds gathered overhead, gentle breeze rustled the trees. Jonathan realized that every part of his life was shifting his priorities, his heart, his home. He thought of Alina, his wife, and how distant she had become. He wanted her to see this transformation, to know that their family was finding a new way forward. He decided to call her later that day, to tell her about the center, and to invite her home for the opening ceremony. That evening, after Lucas was asleep, Jonathan and Aisha sat together in the study. The room glowed from a single lamp on the corner desk. Jonathan looked at Aisha's notebook, open to a page filled with drawings of sensory paths and reading nooks. He thought about how much she had given to this project. "You've been more than a consultant," he said quietly. "You've been my teacher." Aisha looked up, her eyes warm. "I'm just sharing what I know," she replied. "You were the one who believed in a dream." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. All his wealth, he had never known the power of believing in people. In small moments, in second chances. The next morning, a letter arrived from Alina. She wrote that her trip was extended by a week, and she would visit the project as soon as she returned. Jonathan folded the letter carefully and tucked it in his pocket. He smiled at Lucas and Aisha. "Your mom will see the center soon," he said. Lucas looked up from his blocks and said, "Mom?" Aisha rubbed her hand along Lucas's back and said, "Yes, she will see it." Jonathan realized he had much to explain when Alina returned, how he had learned to slow down, how he had learned to listen, and how Aisha had become the heart of their home. Over the following days, the foundation poured fully into place. Reinforced steel rose from the concrete, and wooden frames began to outline the shapes of rooms. Jonathan visited each morning, walking the site in a hard hat and steel-toed boots. He greeted the workers and asked about their progress. He noticed the way Aisha and Lucas followed behind, Aisha pointing out details and Lucas asking questions about the machines. He felt a swell of pride as he watched his son's eyes light up with every new sight. The center was no longer just a plan, was becoming real. One afternoon, a sudden rain shower chased them under a large oak tree. Rain pounded the leaves above, creating a whispering roar. Lucas shivered, and Aisha wrapped her jacket around him. Jonathan stood beside them, feeling the drop of rain on his cheek. He thought back to the blackout, the storm, and the fear in Lucas's heart. He remembered how Aisha's hum had cut through the chaos. Now, as the rain fell around them, he saw how far they had all come, how a storm could bring people together instead of tearing them apart. They returned to the mansion, damp but laughing. Jonathan removed his wet coat and draped it over Aisha's shoulders. He felt a warmth spread through him, and he noticed that Aisha still wore his coat. He admired her calm in the storm and her unwavering care for Lucas. Inside, they dried off and warmed by the fireplace. Lucas climbed onto his father's lap, and Jonathan held him close. He realized that the greatest riches he would ever know were not in his bank accounts but in moments like this: a wet coat shared, a child's laughter, a friend's gentle support. The day of the center's groundbreaking ceremony arrived. A small crowd gathered on the land, people from the neighborhood, friends of the family, and a few of the workers. A simple stage was set with a wooden podium and a banner that read, "Welcome to the Carlisle Family Special Needs Center." Jonathan stood at the podium, Aisha and Lucas by his side. He looked out at the faces before him, curious children, hopeful parents, neighbors who had never known what was coming to their community. He felt his heart beat with anticipation. He spoke softly, in simple words, about his vision, a place of kindness, understanding, and growth. He thanked the workers, the planners, and especially Aisha, who had guided him in seeing what truly mattered. He invited her to say a few words. Aisha stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. She spoke about the dreams of children who needed a safe place, about the power of listening and patience. Her voice was strong and filled with compassion. Lucas stood beside her, clutching her hand. When she finished, the crowd applauded, and Lucas gave a shy wave that made everyone smile. Then, with ceremonial shovels, Jonathan, Aisha, and Lucas dug into the earth together. The first clump of soil lifted, and the machines rumbled to life behind them. Cameras flashed, and laughter filled the air.
Wow.
Jonathan felt tears in his eyes as he looked at Aisha's proud face and his son's excited grin. The first time he had seen Aisha comfort Lucas in that dark room, he never could have imagined that moment would lead her to a community center blossoming from the earth, to friendships that transcended titles, to a family redefined by compassion. As the crowd dispersed, Jonathan knelt beside Lucas. "You did great," he whispered. Lucas smiled up, his blanket tucked under one arm. Aisha knelt too and hugged them both. They stayed like that for a long moment, three hearts together, a new kind of fortune shining brighter than any treasure. And as the rain clouds drifted away, Jonathan knew that this was just the beginning of their journey, one built on kindness, trust, and the belief that every heart, no matter how fragile, could grow strong with love.